Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share park ranger horror stories. First story. I'm a park ranger in the Great Smokies, but I think this thing came from hell. I've lived in East Tennessee for most of my life. Growing up, I'd hear old wives' tales and urban legends about strange creatures that roamed the forest. For the longest time, I thought what every other kid thought, that they were stories told to scare kids away from dangerous places so they wouldn't fall into a ravine or get lost in the massive wilderness. I never thought any of it was more than made-up stories. That's not to say I didn't spend my share of time with covers pulled tightly over my head when the wind blew branches against my window that happened to face the woods. As I grew older, I found myself gravitating toward the stories of strange creatures in the woods. That curiosity is what started me to investigate such things in my spare time. People around here seem to be obsessed with Bigfoot, as if he's some local celebrity. They tend to ignore or downplay other cryptids. I don't know why. With the hundreds of thousands of acres of unexplored and barely explored forest, it seems there's lots of space for anything that feels like making its home there could be left in relative peace. Me, I'm more of a fan of dogmen, unofficially of course. You see, once I graduated high school, my only goal was to become a park ranger. Where else could you go to work and be surrounded by such glorious nature, even at its most dangerous? There are literally dozens of stories I could tell, but the one that sticks with me is the hikers from a couple of years ago. I remember it was early October. I always make the hike up to Klingerman's Dome several times during autumn, gazing out over the canvas of trees, spouting a myriad of colors. Looking every bit like nature's fireworks, show reinforced that I made the right career choice. I was on patrol when a call came in to go to the cabins near Fontana Lake. I got the address and headed south, crossing into North Carolina. When I got there, I was met by a woman who said her husband, son, and brother-in-law had gone to the lake fishing and hadn't come back. I got the information I needed about their general description, names, and description of the truck and boat, then headed out to search for them. She said they were heading up to Wolf Creek. I called it in and told the station I would be driving down to Flat Branch to see if they went in the river there. It was a decent drive to get there, but then it was a decent drive to get pretty much anywhere out in the backwoods of the Smoky Mountains. When I got there, I found 3 trucks parked off to the side. 2 of them had empty boat trailers. I checked the description the wife had given me, and it matched one of the trucks. I had a beginning point for my search. I walked up to the water and looked both ways, hoping to luck out and find them coming in from a hard day's fishing. No such luck. There was a house nearby, so I walked over and asked if they had seen my quarry. The man said he had been out fishing himself yesterday and recalled seeing a boat like the one I described with 2 men and a boy in it. I asked him which direction they were going, and he said west. I asked if he had a boat and could take me up to Wolf Creek. The man's demeanor changed from friendly to deadly quiet. He agreed to take me across the river, but not all the way to Wolf Creek. I accepted what I could get. After a quick jog back to my truck to get my backpack, he ferried me across and quickly left. It was a mile or so to the rural campsite I suspected they had camped at. I started walking along the edge of the river, keeping an eye out for them. It wasn't long until I spotted a boat sitting on the shore. I approached the boat, and it seemed to be the right one. Everything about this missing persons report seemed like just someone who stayed out later than planned. It was a little too easy. I would be very happy to find them sitting by a campfire about to pack up and go home. It didn't take long to hike to the campsite, but when I got there, things stopped being easy. There were only 2 tents set up, but they both looked like someone or something had torn into them. I checked inside each one and found sleeping bags and general camp equipment strewn about. I did my best not to disturb anything. When I came to the second tent, I found something more disturbing. This tent was also in disarray, but as I looked, I saw distinct drops of red. There was a notebook sitting near one of the sleeping bags. I picked it up and paged through it. October 3rd. We headed out for our annual fishing trip this morning. Mom wasn't too happy, but we told her we'd be back tomorrow. The drive to the boat launch was kind of long, but we filled the time talking about all the fish we were going to catch and generally telling stories about the area. Dad tried to scare me with a story about a cryptid that lives in the area, but I knew he was just yanking my chain. We got to the boat launch and headed out into the water without too much of a hitch. Uncle Roger nearly fell in trying to get the boat undone. He didn't find it nearly as funny as Dad and I did. Once we were out on the lake and had our lines in the water, he seemed to settle in and enjoy himself. After a few beers, he was laughing about it with us. We caught a couple of fish, but they were too small, and we had to throw them back. Dad said he'd heard about a good spot up by Wolf Creek. We had better luck when we got there. Uncle Roger caught 3 largemouth bass, and I caught 2. Dad had a big one on his line, but it got loose before we could net it. It was starting to get dark, so Dad said we should go to one of the rural campsites. We pulled the boat up to shore and tied it to a large tree, then took our gear and hiked to the campsite. There wasn't anyone else there, which Dad said was odd because the site is normally full. We unpacked and set up our tents, and Dad got a fire going while Uncle Roger cleaned the fish. We ate and laughed and talked until it was dark, and we turned in for the evening. Dad said there was a better fishing spot further west, and he wanted to go there early in the morning before we headed back to the cabin. It's the middle of the night, and Dad is playing a joke on me. I woke up for some reason, and he wasn't in the tent. I could hear rustling outside along with something pawing the ground and snorting. I knew it was Dad trying to scare me. He and Uncle Roger had been telling cryptid stories while we ate supper. I told them they weren't going to scare me like they did last year. They just looked at each other and smiled. I knew they would have something up their sleeves. I didn't bother to turn the light on or go out and check. I knew they would just run away and hide, pretending to be a creature I had scared off. Then in the morning, they would ask each other if they heard the commotion, hoping to scare me. I wasn't falling for it. One thing you learn from having a prankster for a dad is not to believe anything you see, or in this case, hear. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but Dad was making it tough. He was stomping and growling around so loud, trying to get my attention, but I wasn't having it. When I got up in the morning and went outside, the camp had been destroyed. Uncle Roger asked if I had heard anything last night, and I played along saying I'd heard some creature outside our tent, but I was too scared to go out and check. He made a good show of searching for Dad and seeming genuinely concerned. I was just waiting for Dad to get tired of the game and come back to the campsite. As the morning wore on, Uncle Roger started talking about going to look for him. I wanted to tell him I hadn't fallen for their little prank, but didn't want to spoil their fun. When noon rolled around and Dad wasn't back, I started to get worried. Maybe he had fallen and hit his head on a rock or something. Uncle Roger was beside himself. He told me he would have already gone looking for Dad, but didn't want to leave me alone at the camp. We decided to go look for him. Uncle Roger found what looked like a scuffle, and we headed off in that direction. He told me to stay right with him as we struggled through the forest looking for any sign of Dad. I was starting to doubt that this was a prank. I was getting worried about Dad. The further we went, the more I realized how wrong I'd been. I wanted Dad to jump out and scare me just so I'd know he was okay. We walked around for hours, searching for him, but we couldn't find him. I was beyond worried now, and I could tell Uncle Roger was too, but he didn't let on. He just kept saying Dad was probably already back at the campsite now. When the sun started sinking low in the sky, we gave up our search and headed back. Twice, we lost our way and had to double back to get to the site. There weren't many trails out here, at least not that people had made. When we got back to the site, I ran to our tent, hoping he would be there, but he wasn't. We ate a quick supper and turned in for the night. Uncle Roger promised me he would wake me up when Dad came back. October 4th. Uncle Roger never woke me. Dad didn't come back. I said we should call for help, but he told me Dad had the only phone. We were trying to decide what to do when we heard a rustling in the woods and the birds went silent. We looked around for the source of the noise, and unfortunately, we found it. There was a thing coming toward us. It stood on its back hind legs, and its body made these loud cracking sounds like its bones were snapping into or out of place, echoing all around us. This thing was huge. I literally froze. My body refused to move as this horror came toward us. Uncle Roger grabbed me and yanked me over behind his tent. We tried to hide, but this thing saw us and let out a massive roar. We were so close I could see blood on its claws and teeth. I prayed it wasn't Dad's. "What do we do?" I said. He put his finger up to his lips. It looked over at us and then went into my tent like it was searching for something. "Come on," Uncle Roger said. We snuck away from the monster as quietly as possible. We slipped down the bank of the creek and walked downstream in the water. "Where are we going?" I whispered. "There's a bridge downstream. If we're quiet enough and that thing loses our scent, we could hide under it and hope it goes away." I focused on walking as quietly as I could through the water. The sound of the creek was loud, so I was hopeful it wouldn't see or hear us. It seemed like forever until we reached the bridge. It was a small, wooden bridge that spanned the creek, allowing hikers to pass over. There wasn't a lot of cover. We tried to wedge ourselves into the shadows at the furthest end of it. Time slowed to a standstill as I sat there on the uncomfortable rocks, shivering. Neither of us had our jackets on, and the sun had gone down, taking the warm air with it. I started to doze when I felt a nudge. I looked up and Uncle Roger was motioning me to be quiet. I was about to ask why when I heard the creak of a board on the bridge right above my head. It wasn't a steady walk of a hiker going down the trail. It was a slow, deliberate step on someone sneaking or hunting. I listened in mortal terror as the board slowly gave way to the weight of whatever was on it, one slow step at a time. As if I wasn't cold enough, my teeth began to chatter with fear. It couldn't have been very loud. Uncle Roger barely heard it and went into silent convulsions, motioning me to stop. I bit my tongue to keep the noise down and continued to listen. Only there was nothing to listen to. Whatever was on the bridge had stopped moving. It was as if it was listening to be sure it had heard something. I strained my ears to listen for any movement. When I did, I heard sniffing. The thing was trying to catch her scent. For the first time, I noticed there was a slight breeze blowing. It was blowing in the same direction the water flowed, but I had no idea which side of the bridge the creature was on. The wind could be our savior or our doom. Another slow footstep sounded like a bomb going off as the board creaked beneath it. For the briefest of moments, it seemed like it was moving away toward the far end of the bridge. I hoped and prayed that was the case as another footstep sounded, then another. I breathed a silent sigh of relief as I heard it step off the edge of the bridge and onto the trail. My relief was short-lived, though, as I saw a face peek around the corner and peer under the bridge. I froze in terror as this thing that looked like a giant monstrous dog walking on its hind legs snuck around the corner of the bridge and dipped its feet into the water. It sniffed the air and poked its snout into the shadows under the far side of the bridge. Coming up empty, it turned its focus to the side of the bridge where we were hiding. Daylight had faded to dusk. There was precious little light to see by. That was our only saving grace. The shadows were darker here, making us nearly invisible. But that was rapidly ending as the beast approached. My mind was vapor-locked. I had no clue what to do. Running would just give us away more quickly. It was looking like our only choice was to die. At that moment, I was 100% sure of what had happened to Dad. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks at the thought of my father being torn apart by this monster. As I prepared to die, I felt Uncle Roger lean over a little closer. He was right in front of me, and it was hard to see the monster. I saw his hand move down toward the ground and pick up a stone the size of his fist. I knew right away what was happening. He was trying to shield me. He would offer himself as a sacrifice to protect me. My tears redoubled, making it hard to see. The monster was almost on us. It hadn't acted like it knew we were there, but at this point, it didn't matter. A few more steps, and all doubt would be removed. I saw it reach out with its terrible claws that nearly touched Uncle Roger's nose. This was it. Suddenly it stopped. It lifted its head and sniffed the air. I saw the hair on its back bristle. Then in a heartbeat, it disappeared. Uncle Roger slowly stood and looked around. I tried to do the same, but my legs didn't want to cooperate. I dislodged some stones as I stood, making a little noise and causing Uncle Roger to hiss at me. We stood silently waiting for that thing to come jumping out at us from whatever hiding place it was in. After a few minutes, I began to hope that we were okay. Uncle Roger led the way back to our camp. He said we should change into dry clothes and get a little rest. It felt so good to be warm again. I snuggled up in my sleeping bag and wrote this message so that if we don't make it, someone would know what happened. I hope my dad was as lucky as we were. I read through the entire message, then went back and reread the description of the creature. If it was what I thought it was amazing they were still alive. Knowing what I was tracking put me on guard and made me wonder if I was being hunted right now. If it had intentionally left things lay so it could ensnare another victim. I didn't have much hope of finding them, but I would look anyway. I started with the tracks in the camp, specifically the ones around the tents. It seemed like the boy and his uncle had gone towards the creek. The creature's tracks went that way too. It followed them to the creek where its tracks seemed to wander around, as if it had lost its prey. I saw where they went into the water to throw off its scent. Smart move. I followed the meandering tracks until they came to a small bridge that forded the creek. The tracks went over the bridge, then through the creek underneath it. That didn't make sense unless they were hiding in the shadows. The creature's tracks made a sudden turn and went toward the trail, then up a hill, almost like something spooked it. If it was what I thought, I couldn't imagine anything spooking it. I followed the creature tracks up over the hill, then they doubled back and followed the creek from the top of the ridge. I noticed there was a good view of the creek. It didn't make sense to be going this way until I found myself back in the camp. It had put them right back in its sights. I was confused for a while. I couldn't find a second set of tracks where they left the second time. If the creature had slaughtered them at the campsite, there would be a lot more blood, but there wasn't. In fact, I couldn't find any proof they'd come back. Then it hit me. I went back and looked at the tracks again. There were a few here and there that were doubled. The boy and his uncle must have come back here after the bridge, then left again the same way as before. The disturbing thing was I still hadn't seen any tracks of the father. I circled around the camp slowly, looking for anything I might have missed. Eventually, I found a set of adult tracks leaving a tent and going to the edge of the trees. They stopped facing a tree. There was a dark spot on the bark a couple of feet up. This had the earmarks of a late-night bathroom break. But the confusing thing was the tracks never returned. Like he had stopped there to relieve himself, and then just disappeared. I searched all around the tree when I made a startling discovery. There were flecks of blood farther up on the bark. I circled out further from the tree and found my terrible discovery. Tracks of the creature with drops of blood beside it. My marrow turned to ice at the implication. I followed my new trail, hoping I wouldn't find what my mind was telling me I would. I tried to report to the station on my radio, but strangely all I got in response was static. I knew there were areas out here that didn't get good reception, but I didn't think this was one of them, right near a posted campsite just off a trail. I decided I would try again later. I adjusted my backpack and started off after my prey. As a precaution, I pulled out my sidearm and made sure it was loaded. It seemed like a silly thing to do, but when dealing with a dangerous alpha predator, it's best to make sure you're ready to shoot. My hand shook a little when I put my gun back in its holster. I knew this was dangerous. I knew it would be just as easy to go back to the station and let search and rescue take care of it. But I also knew that there was a man who was in the clutches of a deadly creature, and he was losing blood. I didn't have time to waste. I followed the tracks as best I could through the brush and fallen trees. I would lose the trail, sometimes only to pick it up again when I found a few more drops of blood. The tracks ran along the base of the hill heading west until it came to a stop. It was right in front of a mountain. I looked all around, but the trail had disappeared. Finally, in desperation, I looked up and noticed a cave partway up the mountain. I thought about going up there, but was unsure. That could be the home of this creature, or it could be the home of a dozen other animals, none of which would appreciate me storming into their living room unannounced. After another thorough look around the area, I decided it was likely where my prey had gone. Clouds had been rolling in all day, and now decided they were done playing nice. The rain began slowly enough, but was soon coming down in sheets. The cave was looking better as I covered my eyes and tried to see where I was going. It was raining so hard I couldn't see the cave anymore. I just kept pressing forward in what I hoped was a straight line, over fallen trees, through brush and rapidly rising streams. I finally looked up and saw I was at the base of the mountain. My direction was off by a little bit, and I had ended up a few dozen yards to the right of it, but it was no matter. I started climbing the mountain, being extra careful of my footing, especially in this torrential downpour. After a few slips, including one that had me nearly tumbling off the mountain, I made it to the mouth of the cave. I slipped inside and enjoyed a moment without water dumping on me. I looked down, and the water dripping off of me made a little puddle like I had brought my own rain cloud into the cave with me. I shook off as much water as I could as quietly as possible. The rain pouring down outside made loud splashes inside the cave. It would have been difficult to hear anything else, but I still wanted to be sure. I unbuckled and sat the backpack down just inside the mouth of the cave. The rain had made it gain extra weight, and I didn't know if I would have to move fast. I opened my pack and got out my bottle of water and drank. It had been a while since I had drank anything, and I chugged half of it down. I closed it and saved the other half for if I got out of here alive. With that happy thought rattling around in my brain, I stowed the water bottle back in my pack and pulled out a small flashlight. I turned it on while pointing it at the floor. The bright beam illuminated the cave. It was large as caves go. I could stand up in it and not reach the ceiling. There were many boulders and stones. It wasn't a smooth floor. The walls were rough. There weren't any cave drawings in here. I walked slowly. Each step felt like I was closer to my doom. I pulled out my gun and held it tightly, the sense of foreboding thick in the air. Two thoughts impressed themselves on me. Firing a gun in here would probably deafen me, and the stench was horrific. It smelled like an open sewer in the middle of August. As I crept deeper into the cave, the sounds of the rain diminished, replaced by an eerie silence. I could hear the step of my feet, my breathing, and my heart pounding. As I was seriously considering turning around and leaving, when I saw something ahead of me move. It was big, at least as big as me. I dove against the wall for some cover, forgetting that I was holding a bright light in my hand, so it didn't matter if I tried to hide as long as the light was on. I pointed it at the floor, but didn't turn it off. I heard a shuffling sound, getting closer. I was tempted to turn off the light, but giving the edge to this creature was not a good idea. It already had the home field advantage. I heard it sniffing, but I couldn't see it yet. I decided to find out more by bringing my light up and shining it deeper into the cave. I got the shock of my life when my light landed on the creature, and it was only a few steps away. It was big, at least 6 feet tall, and looked like a dog, with a long snout, only its body seemed elongated. It stood on its hind legs and had hands attached to muscular arms. Overall, it looked like a nightmare. Second story. My little girl got lost on a field trip to a national park. The child the Rangers returned to me was not my daughter. I recall almost word for word the telephone call which had informed me that Lainey had disappeared. Her teacher, calm, unbearable, all saccharine platitudes and reassurance. My own voice fraught and strangled with an instant and instinctual panic. At that time, I had only just emerged, inwardly bruised and outwardly haggard, from a 2-year custody battle with my ex-husband, who had dogged me through the courts not out of any particular interest in Lainey, whom he had always handled with a stranger's cold unfeeling, but to harangue me to the point I felt half mad, my penance for refusing to yield to the man's more violent torments. Our daughter was the only beautiful thing that I had gleaned from our decade together, and I cleaved to her, my prize, my love, with such ferocity that each time I dropped her off at school in the morning, I would sit in the parking lot and shake with a passionate dread of anything happening to her in the hours she was not in my care. All parents know the power of imagined horrors. The kidnapper idling on every corner in the sinister white shell of a van, the teacher alone in a vacant classroom, the husband with quick and vicious fists loitering at the school gates to whisk the unwitting child away. All these things and more cavorted my mind in a grim and raucous glee as I answered the call from Lainey's teacher, knowing with the psychic sureness of any mother that something was wrong. "It's all right, Miss Cameron," said Miss Paxton, whom I'd always found to be an insipid and distinctly useless character. I'm sure Lainey just wandered off and got a little confused trying to find her way back to the group. The park rangers are all out looking for her. I'm sure she'll be found in no time at all. It was all I could do not to scream a dozen accusatory questions down the line. How could you lose her? Isn't it your job to take care of the class? Don't you know that there are savage animals and deep water and steep drops out there in the wilderness? Haven't you thought about that the way I have, agonized like I have, suffered and yearned to save the innocent from all the colors of horror in the world? She's only 10 years old, for God's sake. I snapped through gritted teeth. She must be terrified. Yet even as I said it, I knew the most dangerous thing was that Lainey wouldn't be frightened at all. She had always been a placid, adventurous child, undeterred from her exploratory whims by scratches and bruises, nor by being separated from me or any other guardian. I recall losing her in a shopping mall at the heights of the festive season, finding her, after 3 hours of tearful searching, by a water fountain, tossing nickels she'd found in one lint-filled pocket down into the verdigris depths. "Hi, Mom," Lainey had said, her blonde eyebrows raised with a cool, adult surprise at my distress. "I'm making a wish. Think it'll come true." Through luck and my meticulous care, nothing truly terrible had ever happened to my daughter. No wonder, then, that she could not conceive of herself at the center of such an event. Disaster was, to Lainey, a distant fairy tale, the Rumpelstiltskin that only came for other children of another time. Yet these ills had indeed now taken her, and as I languished by the phone awaiting another call, I pictured 1,000 scenarios, each more sickening than the last. It didn't help matters that the national park in which Lainey had disappeared was notorious for missing persons reports and other unsavory incidents, many of which were quietly suppressed from local news. I had, of course, vehemently opposed the school's decision to include a visit to the area as part of the new curriculum, appalled to find myself bullied into acquiescence by principal and board alike. Thus, upon finding my neurosis vindicated, I could only logically assume that my grislier fantasies would be confirmed in a like fashion. I was no retentive paranoiac, the hysteric archetype of the crumbling woman. Looking back, I might argue my suspicions were but pangs of psionic foresight, a sense that would step forth from shadowed peripheries in the following days and make itself their heart. Smoking cigarette after cigarette in fractious helplessness, I envisioned, darkly, the face of Lainey's father upon receiving the news of her death, like the mask of some malevolent pagan god. He'd sup greedily from the liquor of my grief, the denouement of his daughter's existence, nothing to him, but a tool to eviscerate a reaction from me. Then, suddenly the phone rang again, causing me to jump so violently that I spilled ash down the front of my dress. "Good news, Miss Cameron. Lainey turned up, and she's just fine." I pressed a hand to my mouth, unsure whether I was going to vomit or burst into tears. "What happened?" I asked. "Where did you find her?" There was an odd little laugh on the other end of the line. "Well, it's sort of strange," said Miss Paxton. "One of the rangers found her at the bottom of a 7-foot hole in a meadow. It looked to be a burrow of some kind. Lord knows what made it. Lainey must have just fallen in by accident. We've looked her over, and luckily she doesn't have even a scratch on her. If you'd like to pick her up, she's fine to go home. As I said, she's not injured, just a little shaken up is all." I got into my car and drove the hour-long journey to the park, so soaked in the adrenaline of relief that I was like a dreamer, watching my white hands curl in spidering husks upon the wheel. When I pulled up to the park ranger station, an officer was loitering out front beside Miss Paxton, who was holding the hand of a small blonde child with a firmness that suggested it might run away from her the moment she let go. The little figure stood with its back to me, short-haired and androgynous as an elf, staring off into the forest, as though watching something move in the trees. The other kids milled about nearby, their eyes flat and aloof. I noticed they gave the light-haired child a wide berth, which, had it been Lainey, would have been strikingly unusual, being that she made friends easily, and was close to a group of 5 other girls in her class. Not one of them looked at or spoke to her, loitering at the vertices of the clearing, whispering amongst themselves. As I got out of the car, I saw the blonde child twist at Miss Paxton's arm, attempting to dislodge itself and wander off into the woods. Although the hair was right, and it was wearing a similar outfit to that which I'd set out for Lainey that morning. Nothing in its body language was reminiscent of my daughter, whose loose-shouldered, tomboyish posture I would have recognized at once. Was there some mistake? Had this idiot of a teacher somehow confused Lainey with some other, unknown child? Miss Paxton turned towards me with a welcoming smile, which wavered as she caught my expression. The thin little child stranger swiveled awkwardly on her arm, still wanting to go in the other direction. "Lainey," said the teacher brightly. "Look, your mom's here." She spoke as she might to an infant, and from this I gleaned there was something amiss she hadn't deigned to tell me over the phone. Pressing a hand to the small of the child's back, she ushered it forwards, and at last its face turned towards me, no more familiar than its posture had been. I suppose the girl looked enough like Lainey that anyone might mistake them at a passing glance, but that was all. This child's eyes were spaced further apart, the mouth small and cruel, the nose thinner, and missing the aquiline shape she inherited from me. It was as though Lainey's own face had been drawn from memory, and a poor one at that. Cousins they could easily be, but the same child they were not, and I was amazed that the teacher that saw her 5 days a week could possibly think them identical. It was as I glanced up into the young woman's shifting eyes behind her glasses that I realized she didn't believe it. Not really. Now it seems to me that what she perceived was so beyond her understanding that she had simply elected to place her trust in the most logical explanation, yet not the correct one. Then, however, I merely assumed that she was lying to me for some nefarious purpose, and found myself coolly unsurprised. The world had always seemed set against me and my daughter. Why, then, would the person entrusted to care for my only child be any different? "What is this?" I asked harshly. "Where's Lainey?" Miss Paxton's face drained of color, and she stammered through a few brittle sentence starters, unable to finish even one. The girl that wasn't my daughter twitched and fussed in her grip, her pale eyes as indifferent to my presence as the sea to the swimmer it drowns. I was both repelled and fascinated by her, this tiny usurper held against her will. "Miss Cameron," said the ranger. "Talk with me in the station a second." She was a thin, short-haired woman, hard with corded muscle, and speaking in the sharp, almost Germanic accent that was common to some of the nearby towns. I wanted to refuse the ranger's offer, rally angrily against her with all the obstinance my fear and anguish could lend me. But in the end I went after her, looking back over my shoulder at the unfamiliar child, who flinched and jolted at the end of the school teacher's arm like a condemned man in a rain of artillery fire. The ranger, whose name was Diane Becker, sat me down in a rickety chair and brewed me a cup of coffee so black that I almost retched at the first swig. "Who is that kid out there?" I asked. "She isn't my daughter." "Was it you that found her?" "My colleague," said Becker flatly. "She's off shift. I'll get you her number if you want to talk to her. But anyway, I was there when Mel brought the kid back to the station. Had this with her." The teacher recognized it. The ranger picked up a purple, rainbow print backpack from a nearby desk and pushed it towards me, watching blandly as I touched the name tag and ferreted through the contents. The workbooks with their untidy handwriting, the uneaten packed lunch, the pencil case, whose utensils were all nibbled surreptitiously at their ends. "It's your daughter's?" asked Becker, with the intonation of a statement. "Yes," I said, reluctantly. "But it doesn't matter. That girl out there? I've never seen her before in my life. Lainey is still missing." Becker regarded me without expression. "So you're saying a kid turned up with your daughter's description, wearing her clothes, carrying her stuff? But it ain't your daughter?" I knew how it sounded, but hearing it echoed back in that detached monotone made me want to scream out in frustration. Instead, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and shoved it at Becker, stabbing my finger at photographs and video clips of Lainey as the ranger looked on with cool, dispassionate eyes. "Look," I said, "that's my baby. That's what she looks like. That's her face. That girl your colleague picked up, they're not the same. Can't you see that? And the kids in Lainey's class. None of them know who she is either. Why are you lying to me? What's going on?" But Becker only shrugged, her weathered face an impenetrable slab. "I don't know what to tell you, ma'am," she said. "I'm not seeing the difference." I pinched the bridge of my nose, holding back the threatened tears. "I'm not crazy, okay? There's been some kind of mix-up. That girl's parents are probably frantic, Looking for her. Becker shrugged. Haven't heard anything about that. Only missing kid this week is yours. The helplessness I felt as I stared at the ranger was of such intensity that my vision swam like a desert heat at the edges, a white and crystalline blindness. Becker clearly noticed something amiss in my face, for she shoved the cooling coffee cup towards me and placed a coarse palm on my shoulder. If you think something's wrong, maybe you ought to take the kid to a doctor, she said gently. Get her looked over, you know? Likely Becker thought me unstable, in shock, caught up in the sort of excitement that would die down in a day or two. There was nothing I could say to prove or defend myself. I saw that clearly. I stood up from the table, seizing Lainey's backpack in a wretched burst of anger. She is not my daughter, I said again. When I get to the bottom of this, you'll hear about it. Make no mistake, for all my bluster, I was hyperventilating as I shoved my way back out into the clearing again, every breath sawing up through my side like an animal bite. I don't remember how I went from this pitiful state to sitting with a strange child in the back of the car, driving mechanically along the road. I only recall staring at the little creature in the rear-view mirror, looking desperately for something of Lainey in its pale, furtive eyes, its twitching person, finding nothing. There was no recognition in the sharp little features, no understanding of where it was or what it was doing. I saw it wrestle with the seatbelt like a dog against its collar, put one grubby hand against the passenger window, as though expecting it to slip right through into the air beyond. I couldn't fathom where so wild and capricious and unthinking a child might have sprung from, and despaired that through the stupidity of others it had been thrust upon me. Through a great amount of wheedling and pressure, I was able to wrangle an emergency checkup appointment with Lainey's pediatrician, a weary middle-aged woman who'd handled my daughter's case so many times over the past 5 years. I had no doubt that she, at least, would recognize the grave mistake that had been made when I presented her with the little stranger. It was a trial cajoling the child out of the car into the doctor's office. It only glared with a beady, crow-like malice and attempted to dart past me, prevented only by my hand at its elbow. The arm was all sinew and bone beneath its jacket, soft as twigs under wet leaves. I gave a short cry of disgust and forced myself to cling on, lest the child flee across the parking lot and into the busy road. While not Lainey, it was a little girl, and my maternal instinct to protect life still remained. I kept the stranger close to my side as I pushed it through the office door, wrinkling my nose at the scent of dirt and wet grass that lingered on the child's hair and clothes. I'm not sure what I anticipated upon presenting it to Dr. Maddox. Arched eyebrows, perhaps, asking where Lainey was, if I was caring for a young relative for the day. Yet there was no such surprise, only the usual greeting and tepid professionalism with which she carried out every appointment. As per my request, she enacted a full-body examination, including of the teeth. I had some notion from true crime media that the identity of the stranger might be unearthed that way. The child was obstinate throughout, not with aggression so much as an aversion to touch, writhing about with a lithe, ferrety determination. I dithered, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or disconcerted. The doctor seemed unsurprised by the display, however, going about her work with prosaic method. Only when the child was allowed to slip from the examination table and hunch, all elbows and knees, in one corner did Dr. Maddox take me aside for a hushed conversation. Miss Cameron, why did you bring Lainey in to see me today? She asked in tones of brutal neutrality. The truth would sound akin to madness, aware of this. I only said, I was wondering if you'd noticed a physical difference in Lainey since you last saw her. Dr. Maddox glanced at the child, who stared out of a nearby window, observing a small bird cleaning its wings in a tree. It's not her physical health that worries me, she said. The behavioral changes, however, the mutism, the restlessness. I have to ask, has anything new happened at home? This being a delicate, euphemistic reference to the divorce, to Lainey's father. Not at home, no, I said carefully. Earlier today, there was an incident on a school trip. Lainey wandered off, had some kind of accident. She's been like this since then. Not talking, doesn't respond to anything I or anyone else says. She's totally changed. It doesn't make sense. Dr. Maddox made a sound of gentle understanding, and in it I lost all hope of support, of being heard. Sometimes it's the little things that trigger a reaction that's built up from earlier incidents, she said. A delayed reaction. It may seem sudden, but all things considered, it makes sense. I can recommend a psychologist to look into this better than I can. I imagine the child crouching, silent and unpleasant as a hobgoblin, while I was pressured into lying to another clueless professional. No, I said. No, thank you. Not today. Ignoring the concern in Dr. Maddox's eyes, I turned to the stranger we were pretending was Lainey. Inexplicably, it struck me that perhaps it was not even a child at all, an unsettling thought, bidden from the oddness and mystery of the circumstances, yet one that lingered, all the same. Come on, I said to it in a hoarse voice. The child's head twitched, but it only continued its watch of the window, its thin mouth slightly ajar. Then, as I reached towards it, the head turned, and I thought for one hideous moment that it was going to bite my arm with its perfect little teeth. I froze, not knowing what to do, too frightened and too appalled by the thought to strike it, too stunned to move away. At last the child stood, and when I stepped towards the door it followed, allowing me, with a short twitch, to take its clammy hand, little though I wanted to. It was in the parking lot that I had my first truly unkind thought towards the stranger. Not of harming it, merely of leaving the child there, where it would be found, and driving away. But I knew it was impossible. I'd be arrested for child abandonment and endangerment, institutionalized, perhaps. There would be no end to my accountability, for I could not defend myself when the only other being that might have spoken in my favor had uttered not one word, nor seemed remotely capable of doing so. So it was that I took the little stranger home, feeling more resentful of her presence, of her replacing Lainey with every passing minute. I ended up cooking something for dinner with the stiff, mindless process of an automaton, caring little whether or not the child would like what I set on its plate. It would neither sit at the table nor consider the cutlery, squatting behind one of the chairs to look at me through the slats, its face spliced into irregular oblongs by each wooden spoke. The effect of this was that I could imagine even less how the individual pieces could ever come together to resemble Lainey's features, each of an unnatural difference from hers. "Who are you?" I hissed, across the now gelid dinner. "Where is my daughter? Why are you here, and not her?" The child slid away from the chair and against the back door, scuffling like a hound plagued by worms. "All right," I said, sharply, standing up from my place with a screech of chair legs upon tiles. "Go outside. Play. Something." I unlocked the door and ushered the stranger out across the backyard, relieved that it went out without event, allowing me my first moment alone. The inescapable bind of my situation overwhelmed me, and again I collapsed into my chair, leaden as a coin dropped into some fathomless well. I missed Lainey terribly, thinking forlornly what a beautiful, simple afternoon it would be if she were still here, kicking her dirty sneakers off under the table with a sighing affectation of grown-up tiredness. She would have shown me a rock or flower she'd found on her trip, which I would pretend a dutiful fascination in, and cleared her plate of food in 15 minutes before managing to thieve a double helping from my own, her boyish, playful irreverence overshadowing the very light in the room. Remembering her hammered home ever plainly that the creature I'd brought back from the park was not Lainey. And as I stood up to look at the girl from the kitchen window, I wondered, with a twisting repulsion, what sort of parents had managed to raise such offspring. A light rain had fallen. Unperturbed, the child knelt at the edge of a flower bed, digging with both hands in the wet soil. "Hey," I said, sharply. "What are you doing?" As I stepped outside, one arm raised to shield my hair from the rain, I saw that a number of worms and other insects were churning about in the dirt, as though the child's very digging had drawn them up, like a seagull's dance. Disconcerted, I leant down to pull the girl away, then stopped, a guttural cry jarring my chest. The child was shoveling handfuls of the infested soil into its mouth, stones, weeds, and clods of earth alike vanishing into the greedy pit of its throat. Brown and bloody spittle hung from the thin lips in swinging strands, and I was horribly amazed that the little white teeth did not break as they ground down on grit and decorative pebbles. "No!" I snarled, and with a feat of strength I didn't know I possessed, I hoisted the squirming beast under one armpit, and carried it back into the house, up to the bathroom. The chaos of undressing the stranger and thrusting its pale body under the shower head was like a scene from some Victorian asylum, although conducted in an uncanny, scuffling silence that perturbed me more than if the child had screamed. I let go of it and leant, panting with exertion, against the bathroom wall, wondering grimly why I had bothered, why I was still engaging with any of this. The child looked balefully at me from under a sodden cap of yellow hair, its cut mouth still. My eyes rooted to its pale ears, nudging from behind dripping fronds. Their tips were sharp, like white flint, unfamiliar. Another wrongness, another indicator that the girl wasn't mine. Still, I deposited it in Lainey's bedroom for the night, there being no other space in the small house in which to have it sleep. It turned my stomach to think of the feral, silent child touching my daughter's things, leaving its damp scent on her stuffed animals, her pillows, the sheets. Twitching and unsettled by every perceived sound from Lainey's room, I imagined the child gnawing at the walls and crawling through them like a rat, or sickness in a dying tree. I tossed and turned until my pillow was flat and my hair tousled upright. In the end, I withdrew the cigarette carton I kept hidden at the back of my sock drawer and smoked to the end of the pack. When morning came, white and sore as a scar, I went to Lainey's room and opened the door slowly, poised to dart back should the child leap at me. Although it hadn't yet expressed any particular violence, outside its outbursts on contact, I well suspected an unprovoked attack would soon come. As daylight sighed through the doorway, I saw that, while the bed was empty, Lainey's quilts had been pulled down between the headboard and the wall into a sort of nest. The blankets stirred, and a tiny spindle-fingered hand emerged, parting the blankets to reveal a pale eye, squinting at the light. There was only the barest recognition there, as of the pet of an acquaintance that has encountered you once or twice, and briefly at that. I felt suddenly a foreigner in my own home, alienated by the invader. I got the child dressed in Lainey's clothes as quickly as I was able and dropped it at the school gates, half hoping that it would take off into the street and become lost indefinitely, unshackling me from its burden. Clinging to that dream, I drove off, glancing back over my shoulder to see the ugly little stick figure with its naked eyes, standing apart from the other students, insidious and strange. For the first time, I was glad of my doldrums office job, numbing my sadness and the lingering dread of the cuckoo child I'd been saddled with through work. I would gladly have chained myself to my laptop for reprieve, so rapidly had all sense and perspective left me in my turmoil. How comforting the beetle drone of the machine was to me, then the aseptic screen and its endless figures and their utter absence of meaning. A telephone call came, striking me from this drab comfort like a sudden fall in a dream. Who was it to be? Miss Paxton? My ex-husband, poised to gloat? Mrs. Cameron? A voice asked, youthful, wavering, as I hesitantly picked up the receiver. It's MS, I said blandly. Who is this? Excuse me, my name is Melanie Hale. I'm a volunteer at the National Park. Diane passed on your contact details. I was the one that brought your daughter in yesterday. Are you free to talk? Diane thought you might want to clear up some details with me. Diane, I repeated, suddenly alert. Becker. Yes, I remember her. She was pretty dismissive of my concerns. To be honest, I heard the younger woman swallow, uncomfortably. I'm sorry about that. She just has a different way of dealing with the public. I think she appreciated your situation, but, well, it's tricky. Unimpressed by her rambling, I said, in what way? Miss Hale, Melanie? I'm certain you've given me the wrong child, and I don't have a scrap of proof. If there's anything you can tell me that would help me, I'd be grateful. There was another awkward pause before the volunteer answered. It's difficult to explain without an intimate knowledge of the park. I've been here 3 years, and still it surprises me. I found your daughter in a meadow by our biggest lake. You probably heard she'd fallen down an animal burrow of some kind. How tired I was of the same story, which I little believed. Well, said Melanie, the thing is we don't have any animals in the park capable of digging a burrow that large, and it certainly wasn't man-made. That rang some alarm bells with me, and probably with Diane too, but she would never bring this up with an outsider, unfortunately. A coldness ran across my shoulder blades like a shadow. I didn't like the halting nervousness in Melanie's voice, the sense that what I'd so long feared, without words, was forming before me. Is this about the disappearances in the park? I asked. I heard it was drugs or trafficking. That's the theory the police have been coming to us with, said Melanie, frankly. And trust me, there's zero evidence of that. But I and plenty of other people have seen things here that might be explained in less straightforward ways. I glanced around the office, relieved that none of the other workers were paying attention. Such as? I prompted. Melanie cleared her throat. A smoker's cough. This is going to sound really strange, but here it is. There are supernatural happenings here is the only way I can put it. Everyone has their own idea of what's going on. Out in Walpurgis Town, the residents are mostly old European settler families, and they brought a lot of their old myths over with them. Or contextualized what they saw with those stories, I guess. My Nana used to tell me about fae folk that lived in caves and burrows, how they were just straight up mean and hateful to people that came across them. Sometimes they'd steal their possessions, other times the people themselves, and they'd leave their own behind in their places. Changelings, I think they're called. They're usually sick in all the stories. Obviously, I used to think it was all horse shit, but working here, seeing the missing folk that turn up, strange? I don't know. There's something here, but I wouldn't call them fairies. Whatever it is feels older than that. The phone felt slippery in my hand, as though it were a bloodied bone I held in place of metal and plastic. Like I said, Melanie stated, I'm really not supposed to talk about this. There's really no proof at all, so I could get in a lot of trouble for bringing it up with you. Anyway, you probably think I'm nuts. No, I whispered, so quietly I doubt she heard my voice. I don't. Go on. Clearly relieved, the young ranger continued with a renewed confidence. I had such a bad feeling when that teacher called the ranger station yesterday. I always do when we have one of our weird cases come up. I was told your little girl had gone wandering by the lakeside, so I checked her first, then headed out across a nearby grassland area, which is also pretty well known for reports. When I saw that burrow, to be honest, I wanted to turn back. We all avoid them, usually. Leave them well alone. But on the off chance a kid really had fallen down there, I shone my flashlight down the hole, feeling sure as hell something bad was going to happen to me for poking around. Right away, I saw a little girl looking right up at me, not saying a word, just staring. Her eyes didn't look right to me, and she didn't talk or yell or anything. Just stood there like a rat when you turn the light on in the kitchen. Not used to people at all. I would have backed off and gotten out of there, but that teacher came running up behind me. Clearly figured from the way I was bent over I'd found something. I couldn't walk away then, obviously. Nothing I could do but pull the kid out of the burrow and take her over to the ranger station. She was acting wild. Didn't know anybody she saw. I pulled Diane to one side with my concerns, but she didn't want to know. We've got to hand her over, she said to me. What do you want me to do? Throw her back? Come on. Then my shift was over, and there was nothing I could do. I was up all night thinking about it. I don't know if I'm even doing the right thing calling you to tell you all this. You are, I said. You did. I hung up and sat with my face in my hands, like a scene from a melodrama, yet feeling nothing of that passion, nothing but the sureness of what I must do. At the end of the school day, I went to pick up the child. As I'd anticipated, Miss Paxton was standing with it at the gates, her mouth pressed into a line as thin and white as a chalk drawing. Hi, she said faintly. Can we talk? Lainey's been having some difficulties at school today. Of course she has, I cut in sharply. And we both know why that is, don't we? The teacher looked taken aback, a guilty avoidance in her eyes. I looked at the child, which seemed even less a fit in its own skin than ever, flinching and glaring at every passerby. I gazed hard at the odd little face, the clawing hands with dirt under the nails. Let's go, I said, and the child followed, if only in that it knew, in some base manner, that I was its caretaker here above earth. I drove out to the national park without even stopping at home first, having already been by to pick up a change of clothes and a spade, which I had packed in a canvas bag in order to be less conspicuous. The sun was a low, yellow-red stain against the sky, looking like blood and egg yolk as I tumbled the child out of the car and ushered it out onto the trail. The light imprinted itself on the edges of my vision as we walked, turning all I saw that same shade. I had a map of the park with me, which was easy enough to follow. Laney's class hadn't ventured particularly far out, only a couple of hours along one well-used path. Whether or not the child knew then where I was taking it, I don't know. It stumbled at the end of my arm with the same fussing displeasure with which it seemed to regard all things. The lake came into view, and the mountain range beyond it. To the right lay a stretch of grass, so flat it was like absinthe spilled across a desktop, intimidating in the vastness of its plains. This was where the ranger, Melanie, had found the child dressed in my daughter's clothes. This was where the burrow dwellers lived, the old mischiefs of Walpurgis legend. I should have laughed to find myself believing in such myths without question, but I had seen this creature devour dirt and stones, could feel, now with a firm conviction, the watchful, humming presence of something underfoot, far, far down. Heading out there, I hadn't expected to come across a burrow. The chance of doing so in such grand terrain was inconceivable. Yet the park seemed full of such unlikely details. For after a further 20-minute excursion, I nearly found myself tumbling down into a pit much like that which Melanie had described. I stood at the mouth of it, feeling, as I peered down, the same crushing numbness that had gripped me since the telephone call in the office. Grief without hope of an end was that draining absence. And yet it was through that very hope that I was there. "Look," I said to the child, "that's where you came from. I want you to go back down there and give me my daughter." I don't know why I thought it would understand me. Its white-blue eyes were lifeless but for the captured flare of the sun, its mouth slack, speechless. The young ranger had said the burrower dwellers left their sick in place of the people they took. This creature was surely one of them, insensible to anything that was said to it. That, or like any animal, it only heard my voice as a series of meaningless sounds. Either way, it could not respond to me, could not give me what I asked for. I looked at the stranger for a long moment, glancing over my shoulder and all about us, seeing no one else in view at this odd hour. Then, with a quick motion I couldn't take back, I stepped up behind the child and shoved it down into the burrow with both hands, glad that its scrabbling attempts to clamber back up the crumbling sides only pulled grass and dirt down on top of it. I heard it moving at the bottom of the pit, scratching with its fingernails, and took the spade out of my bag. If the child made any headway up the sloping side of the burrow, I would push it back down. I decided, repeating the act as often as I had to until the ones that had sent it above ground returned my Laney to me. Surely they had her, still, I told myself, had kept her like a pet in their warrens, a thievery that might be reversed. Yet as I sat on the grass by the burrow, waiting, I began to consider, with all the imaginative plenty of dread, the possibility that something more terrible than merely being taken might have befallen my daughter. As night fell, and the cold, and the dark, and the silence provoked me, I at last began to wonder if the young ranger and I had been mistaken. Perhaps the little girl I had thrown down into the hole in the earth had been my daughter. After all. Third story. I'm a park ranger at MT Rainier. People keep going missing, and I think I found out why. 25. That is the number of people who have gone missing at the park since the beginning of the year, with nothing being done or said about it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'll lose my job when they find this posting, but I have other things to be scared of at this point, and this needs to get out. I'm a wilderness ranger at MT Rainier. My job is to walk the hundreds of miles of trail and wilderness in the park looking for problems and helping lost and injured hikers. In the old days, any lost hiker would mean all of us going out together, putting together a search plan, and doing our best to get them home safely. Things are different today. Ever since the start of 2022, whenever a person gets reported as missing, the family is assured we are on it and will do our best to find them, and promise that they will dispatch us to look. As soon as the family is gone, our bosses tell us that they'll have a search and rescue company take over, and if we know what's best for our jobs, we should just focus on checking trail conditions and doing the rest of our jobs. And so it's gone on since 2022. At first, there were just a few people missing here, and they're all over the park. It didn't seem that unusual other than our rangers not being involved in the search, but we figured it was some new policy and shrugged it off. More people started disappearing as the year went on, making all of us wonder what was going on and why it had been made clear to us we should keep our mouths shut. Personally, I figured it was just a combination of bad trail conditions from a rough winter, an influx of inexperienced hikers, and the Park Service trying to avoid looking bad when we needed more funding. Until last Thursday. It was an overcast day, and I was walking along the trail up to Ipsit Pass in the Carbon River area, humming quietly to myself to pass the time and wondering how far up I would go before I had to put on crampons when I saw it. Off to the side of the trail, maybe 50 feet into the forest, there was an odd light on the forest floor. At first, I thought the light was just a reflection off of water or some trash someone had left, but as I moved closer, the light didn't fade or change. It just stayed steady. Maybe it was a lost flashlight? I had walked this trail dozens of times and never noticed it before. I knelt down, taking my pack off, and saw that the light seemed to be coming from just under the dirt. For some reason, I felt uneasy. I looked around to see if anyone else was nearby on the trail, and saw no one. Shrugging, I reached into the dirt to poke at the light and see what it was. Poking around, I found the corner of a slightly open trapdoor that was at most only a foot wide on each side. It was camouflaged nearly perfectly. If it had not been left just barely ajar with the light exposed, there is no way anyone would have seen it from the trail. I kept opening it, feeling uneasy, but hoping it was some sort of buried seismometer, or at worst maybe some hiker's idea of a good place to cache food and water for a long trek. Instead, I found the opening to what appeared to be a small burrow of sorts with an electric camping torch at the corner. I shoved my head down to look inside. The space was small, with enough room for one person if they didn't mind contorting themselves. On the walls of the burrow were dozens of Polaroid photos of people hiking. All of the photos seemed to have been taken very low to the ground. The photos were from all over the park, many dozens or more miles apart. Most of the photos I didn't recognize, but among them I saw a few that I knew for a fact were hikers that had gone missing over the last year. Then my heart stopped. I saw a photo of me hiking along the Ipsit Pass trail around a half hour ago. Crack! I heard a twig snap somewhere around me. I took my head out of the burrow and started running down the trail the way I came. I didn't look back or stop until I got to the wilderness cabin near Ipsit Campground. I locked and barricaded the door and waited until another ranger showed up the next morning, not sleeping a wink. I asked him to walk back along the Ipsit Pass trail with me. He was annoyed that I wouldn't say why but agreed. We spent an hour looking, but couldn't find any sign of the burrow. I asked for some time off right afterwards, and my manager seemed very suspicious and demanded to know why. I made up some excuse about my family and didn't tell him or anyone else what I saw. For some reason, I knew that telling them would at best end with me losing my job. I don't know who or what made that burrow, but I think it's taking people at Rainier, and for some reason the government is covering it up. I wish that was the end of the story, but it's not. This afternoon, I saw something glinting from within the air vent on the floor of my kitchen. I thought maybe my cat had stuck another toy in it. I took the grating off the vent to take the toy out. Instead of a cat toy, I found a Polaroid photo, taken low to the ground, of me making breakfast this morning. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comment section and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.